Happy Monday to all of you guys, and today we'll be talking about the team that made it to the Stanley Cup Finals last season, missed the playoffs, becoming just the first team since the LA Kings to miss the playoffs after making it to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, I didn't talk about the other teams, but this team, whew, I think I feel bad for them. And this was similar to how the Niners season was after they made it to the Super Bowl. So let's talk about how they missed the playoffs. Well, let's just say they had a delay of their season, and the injuries, like the Niners, have had a big problem. So let's compare the Niners and the Stars right now and see how these two missed the playoffs in similar situations. Let's start with the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars had so many injuries. Well, not a lot of injuries, but some injuries. They lost Ben Bishop for the season due to a surgery to his right knee. Second base season on Monday after having hip surgery. And then Radulov, he played only 11 games. And then after March 18th, he had surgery to his core muscle in April. And then Robert Hintz, who's only played 43 games this season, played through a lower body injury that made him either miss a game, make a decision, or play through it. But this point though does not make him feel like he's been playing injured. Like he's like Erik Karlsson. He made it almost to the Stanley Cup Finals for crying out loud. Now there's been some opportunity. Now the other problem is overtime, and like the Leafs in the 2016-17 season, the Stars had a lot of problems. They had, I'm counting this, 14 past regulation losses, the most. Columbus had the second most, but they've had a disaster. In overtime, just 5 wins in 19 opportunities and 2 wins in 8 shootout opportunities. That's pretty much so many points off the table right now. And so, what's the reason that they could be back? Jason Robertson has been had a great rookie year, but whether he wins the Calder or not, I mean, the future is bright for him. And how about Joe Pavelski? I mean, since coming with Dallas, his first season wasn't as his productive year, but his second season, oh boy, I think they found another winger to help Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn. There's no reason Joe Pavelski can be staying here for a couple of years. The goaltending has been great, despite the fact Hudobin, who played in the bubble, has been essentially well, and Oettinger, the rookie, he's played almost perfectly. I mean, the same percentage in GAA, yeah, but it's gonna be a pretty successful year for this team. But again, injuries foiled them the most. So now we talk about the Stars. Let's see how the Niners were similar to that. They had injuries and a lot of injuries. George Kittle was potentially out for the year mostly. He came back just like he only played like 4 or 5 games, and he had productive games at that time, like his 11 catches for 182 and 1 TD against the Eagles. And then I mean, his injuries were worse than I thought. First game, he had a knee injury. Comes back against the Eagles, had a productive night, then gets injured in Seattle. Missed those games. Came back with 16 against the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, his stickers wise weren't that bad, but talk about the injuries that made him ineffective most of the time. He also had only 2 catches and 72 yards against the Rams, if I'm correct. So again, but they were not the only injuries. Jimmy G was out most of the year because of almost an MCL injury where he suffered in week 2. Came back only to have the same injury again, and then he missed almost the entire season. So here's another one. But the biggest blow, defense. Bosa was out for the year. Solomon Thomas was out for the year. Then they lost Exini Ansa. D4 was out most of the year. They lost a lot of defensive parts, but Fred Warner was the only productive guy on the year with 100 plus tackles. And despite the fact the offense has some also injuries, like Debo Samuel had foot injuries to deal with. Then they had Raheem Mostert was out with a knee injury. Then they had, oh, I could just run the table all over again. They had Jordan Reed, who their acquisition, Trent Williams. Like Trent Williams was the only productive guy. I mean, if this wasn't all for these injuries, they could have come back. They could have won, maybe made it to the playoffs at least. But you look at these two teams, injuries to their key players made them almost miss the playoffs. They could have almost made the playoffs, but injuries again. I mean, despite the fact that the injuries, other players stepped up, like Brandon Ayuk, the rookie. Then they brought in, then let's just say, the running backs. They brought in Kevin Coleman was fine. I mean, how many running backs did they had? I mean, they had they had wide receiver right now who play as running back. I mean, look at all these players that stepped up. They played pretty well, but you talk about the injuries, it couldn't stop them. And how about Jeff Wilson, who played in for emotion, had a career high 11 touchdowns. I mean, look at all these guys that stepped up. I mean, yeah, they had injuries, but Ayuk, Wilson, Fred Warner, and also I was about to tell you Richard Sherman, who will not be returning to the Niners this season. So there you go. Two teams that had similar injuries that almost made the playoffs, but just missed it because they're too much to handle. That's all for today, and hope you have a great Mother's Day today. And this is Sue Elise signing off.